Stephen Horahan here at BrandMasterAcademy.com, and in this video I want to talk to you about brand messaging, specifically the importance of brand messaging and the tool that you definitely should be using to go out and express your brand in the marketplace. And I know what you're thinking, core message? Now, I've been in the branding game around about 10 years or so, and in that time I've had many people, entrepreneurs, business owners, come to me and ask me, how much do you charge for a logo? But what I've never ever heard a business owner or an entrepreneur ask me is, how much do you charge for brand messaging? But if you think about what branding is for a second, if you think about the end goal of branding, the end goal of branding is to shape the mind of the audience, to influence their buying decisions so that they choose your brand over your competitor's brand. That's what the end goal of branding is. But think about your own buying decisions here. How many times have you gone out and bought a product or bought a service based on a logo or based on a brand identity? Now, if you're a designer and you love design and you love brand identities, then maybe you've gone out and made a purchasing decision just because you love that brand identity. But that's not how most people make decisions. Most people look at the market and they listen to what brands are saying. They listen to the messages and they build an idea of what that brand means to them and the value that they bring to the table and the difference that they make and how that brand would fit into their lives. And then they make a decision based on that. And it is the messaging of that brand that shapes the idea, that shapes the image of that brand in their mind and paints a picture of what kind of impact that brand will have in their life. So if you don't have a messaging strategy, if you don't have a clear messaging strategy for your brand, well then you're not shaping the mind of your audience and you're not influencing the mind of your audience the way your competitors probably are. So what is brand messaging? Well, they're all the individual key messages that you want your audience to understand about your brand that will help to shape their perception of your brand and help to paint that image of your brand that you want to own in their mind. So pretty much all and every piece of communication that you send out into the marketplace across all touch points is part of your brand messaging strategy. So that just goes to show how broad the brand messaging strategy is, because today there are so many different touch points. There is your website copy, your blog posts, your social media posts, your packaging, your business cards, any kind of print collateral, your email, your drip campaigns. All of these are touch points that your audience comes into contact with your brand. And if you haven't taken the time to shape the messaging through the key messages that you've identified that you want your audience to understand about your brand, then each and every touch point is a missed opportunity to shape the mind of your audience the way you want them to see your brand. Now, when I first dived into brand strategy, I realized pretty quickly how important messaging was. But when I started to research, one term that I kept coming across was core message. Now, if you look into brand messaging, then core message is a term that you'll see come up again and again. And core message is a very important part of branding. Essentially, it's the most distilled message that you would use for your audience to get them to understand the most important part about your brand. And that's usually based around, your differentiation strategy and the value that you bring and the difference that you make in comparison to your competitors. But your core message on its own is just a body of copy. And if you go out onto Google and you search for these terms, you're going to come across these articles that will give you a formula to create a core message, and the core message will be a body of text. But a body of text is not a tool. A body of text is not something that you can use to shape your brand messaging strategy. It's not something that you can use again and again and again. Once you've created that core message, it's not something that you can go and post to your social media account, then to your website, and then continue to repost again and again and again that same message over time. So your core message, although it is a useful tool and it really does distill what it is that you're trying to get your audience to remember about your brand, and it's important internally within the brand as well, so everybody is clear on what that, really important message is that you want your audience to understand. But as a tool, it doesn't help. As a tool to express the brand, to go out and express the brand across multiple touch points consistently over time, it doesn't help, because it's just going to reiterate that same point over and over again. So you need something more than that. And the tool that you need to go out and express your brand is a brand messaging framework. So what is a brand messaging framework? Well, it's not a single body of copy the way a core message is. Rather, it is a collection of key messages that all come together to shape the idea that you want your audience to have about your brand. So they'll shape their perceptions so that they see your brand the way you want your brand to be seen. So this is all developed strategically. You need to understand what your audience wants and the difference that you want to make in the marketplace, the value you want to bring, and how you want your audience to see your brand in the marketplace. And then you develop a series of key messages to help shape those perceptions. Those key messages, when they come together in the form of a brand messaging tool, then you can use them time and again to shape your messaging, to shape those touch points so that over time your audience sees these messages again and again. Each time they do, it helps to shape their mind a little bit more the way you want your brand to be seen, and over time they will have the perception of your brand that you have strategically set out there in the marketplace. And ultimately, the idea is that with those perceptions, it will influence their decisions to take you on as their brand of choice. So that is the important difference between the core message and the brand messaging framework. One is a simple single body of copy. The other is a series of key messages that are strategically developed to shape the mind of your audience. But not all key messages are created equal, and there is a hierarchy when it comes to these messages. You need to first identify what the messages are and then prioritize them in order of importance. And this order of importance is not based on you, it's based on your audience. It's based on what your audience deems as most important. Now, when it comes to all of us, when we look at anything, when we're introduced to anything new, the very first thing that we think about, whether we think about it consciously or not, is what's in it for me? If we're introduced to something new, whether it's a new brand or a new idea, the first thing that we automatically think about, and this is part of our reptilian brain, we just do this automatically, we think about what's in it for me. So your brand messaging framework needs to be split up into your primary core message and your secondary core message. The primary core message is going to focus on scratching that itch for your audience. So, they quickly understand what's in it for them. They can quickly see that there's value, and they can see what kind of influence that your brand brings to the table, what impact it's going to have in their lives. And once you've scratched that itch, once you've convinced them that yes, you do have a role to play in their lives and you do bring some kind of value to the table, then your secondary core message is about humanizing that relationship. It's about bringing more to the table than just this transaction over here. It's about humanizing your brand, showing that there's a human side and that you're more than just a corporate entity. So your primary core message is the most important message because you need to quickly convince your audience that you have some kind of value for them. And you need to feed that reptilian brain that you're not a threat here. You can bring some kind of value to the table. And then after that, your secondary core message really starts to nurture that relationship and really brings that human side to your brand so that your audience doesn't just see the value but sees that there's more to your brand than just this transaction. And this ties in perfectly into the importance of your brand voice. Now, what you say to your audience through your key messages will influence what they understand about your brand and shape that idea of what you bring to the table in their mind. But the way you deliver those messages will shape how they feel about it. And this is getting into the human side of branding and the human brand persona and that brand personality. You need to lace your brand with personality. You need to understand the personality of your audience and develop a personality for your brand so you can speak to your audience in a way that they're going to be most open to your messages. So if you're able to strategically lace your communication with that kind of personality, then you're going to be able to resonate not just with the words that you use and what you say through your messaging, but the way you say it and the personality that you deliver those messages with. Now, the next principle that you need to understand is that your brand message sells an outcome. Now, your product or service might be jacked up on features and benefits, and that might be the difference that your product or service offers in the marketplace. But if you keep banging on about your features and your benefits, it's not going to have the impact that you think it's going to have. And there's an old saying that a customer doesn't buy a drill, he buys a hole in the wall. So with that same philosophy, your brand is not selling what it's selling. It's not selling the thing. It's not selling the product or the service. It's selling the outcome of the product or the service, what that product or service brings, what that outcome is on the back of buying that product or service. And that's key in your messaging. You need to focus in on that outcome, and you need to understand the emotional connection that your audience has to that outcome. How do they feel about achieving that outcome, and how do they feel about not achieving that outcome? And they are the difference between your fears and your desires. And if you understand them and you're able to lace your brand messaging with those fears and desires, and you're able to talk to those pain points, well, then you're going to be able to develop a messaging strategy that resonates with your audience, that resonates with those emotions that they're feeling around those pain points. So it's really important to remember that outcome, focus in on that outcome, not to focus in too much on the specifics and the details, but take a step back and look at what they're actually trying to achieve. Where are they trying to get to? What journey are they on at the moment, and how are you going to be able to help them get there? So focus on that outcome through your messaging, and you'll resonate more clearly with your audience. And finally, go out and develop a brand messaging guide. Now, remember what I said before about the core message. The core message is not a tool that you can use again and again, and it doesn't guide all of your communication, certainly not consistently anyway. You need to understand all of the key messages that you want your audience to understand before going out and creating any kind of piece of content across any single touch point, because that guide will act as consistency for that messaging. And over time, that is what's going to shape and influence the idea of your brand in the mind of your audience. That consistency, time and again, those key messages time and again, they are what you've defined in your brand strategy as what you want your audience to understand about your brand. And if you keep delivering those messages over time, then that is how your brand is going to be shaped in their mind. That is how you influence their mind, and ultimately that is how you influence their buying decisions. So develop that guide and make sure it's used consistently throughout all of your messaging. But I'd love to hear from you. Have you been using Core Message as your primary messaging tool? Have you got a new perspective now on brand messaging and brand messaging strategy? And will you try to implement what you've learned in this video into your own processes? I'd love to know. If you've got any questions in relation to messaging at all, let me know in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer all of them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. It'll let you know when I've got new videos out. Until the next time, happy branding, and I will see you in the next video.